Picture this, a peaceful harbor, its waters still as glass, ringed by steep cliffs that seem to touch the sky. After weeks of hardship at sea, this sheltered cove feels like a godsend to the weary sailors of Odysseus. They guide their 12 ships into the calm bay, the men's spirits lifting at the sight of a clear, gently sloping path leading inland. It's a place that promises rest, fresh water, and safety. But in the world of ancient myth, safety is often a carefully laid trap. This is the moment before the storm, the deceptive calm before a horror unlike any other descends. For the men who step ashore, this place will be their final resting ground, and for their leader, Odysseus, it will become the site of one of his most devastating and narrowly escaped tragedies. He sent a small party ahead, scouts to find the local inhabitants and seek their hospitality. What they found instead were not friendly faces but giants. The scouts came upon a young woman drawing water, a princess of this strange land, who led them to her mother, the queen, a figure of immense and terrifying stature. The queen's appearance was the first true warning, a sign that the rules of the world they knew no longer applied here, but the true horror was yet to be unleashed. Without warning, without provocation, the queen summoned her husband, the king, and a bloodbath began. These were not just giants, they were the Laestrygonians, a name that would forever be synonymous with pure, monstrous savagery. They swarmed the harbor, hurling boulders the size of houses down from the cliffs, smashing the Greek ships to splinters. They waded into the blood-red water, spearing the terrified sailors like fish, and then, in an act that defied all civilized norms, they carried the broken bodies back to their city not for burial but for a feast. This is the story we're exploring today, a deep and chilling journey into the terrifying and obscure origins of the Laestrygonians, the giant cannibals of Greek mythology. While names like the Cyclops or Medusa have echoed through the ages, the Laestrygonians remain in the shadows, a more brutal, less understood terror. Their story is more than just a single episode of violence. It is a window into the ancient world's deepest fears. Fears of the unknown, of a nature that is actively hostile, and of a hunger that is both literal and symbolic. We're going to trace their lineage back to the very beginning, to the primordial forces that spawned them. We'll investigate why their particular brand of horror was so potent, questioning what these man-eating giants truly represented to the people who first told this story. Was their cannibalism merely a monstrous detail, or was it a profound commentary on the fragility of civilization itself? This is a promise of a journey into one of mythology's most chilling tales, a descent into a darkness that is as fascinating as it is frightening. So settle in as we pull back the veil on the dark origins of the Laestrygonians and uncover why this brief, brutal encounter left a scar on the epic of Odysseus that never truly healed. Now, to truly understand the depth of this horror, we must turn to the original source, the epic that immortalized this nightmare, Homer's Odyssey. Our guide for this descent is Book 10, where Homer, with a poet's eye for chilling contrast, paints a scene of deceptive tranquility. After escaping the sorceress Circe, Odysseus and his fleet are lost and weary, their morale as battered as their ships. Then they sighted a narrow channel leading to a perfectly enclosed harbor, a natural fortress of unscalable cliffs. Homer describes it with a detail that makes the coming betrayal all the more acute, a harbor so serene that not even a wave stirs, and within it, a small island shielding the entrance, creating a pool of absolute calm. It is a sailor's dream, a promise of safety so complete that every ship is moored side by side, no watch is set, and the men let their guard down completely. This initial piece is the first layer of the trap, masterfully set by the ancient bard to lure both the characters and the audience into a false sense of security. The horror begins not with a roar, but with a quiet, probing curiosity. Odysseus, ever the cautious leader, doesn't bring his entire force ashore. Instead, he chooses a scouting party and sends them inland. They soon find a well-worn path, and following it, they come upon a maiden drawing water at a spring. She is described as towering, a daughter of the Laestrygonian race, and she directs them to the house of her father, the king. This meeting is a crucial moment of dramatic irony. We, the audience, sense the danger in her size, but the weary Greek scouts see only a guide, a potential source of civilized hospitality. They proceed to the lofty palace of King Antiphates, and it is here, within those walls, that the civilized world of the Greeks collides with a raw, primal savagery. They find the queen first, a figure of such immense and terrifying proportion that she stuns them into silence. She doesn't greet them, she bellows for her husband. And Antiphates arrives not with the measured grace of a king, but with the immediate predatory instinct of a monster. He doesn't ask questions, he doesn't demand tribute or seek their origin. In one of the most shocking and visceral moments in all of ancient literature, he simply snatches one of Odysseus's men, a Greek warrior in his prime, and devours him alive. Homer doesn't shy away from the brutality. This is not a symbolic act, it is a literal, horrifying consumption. The other men, frozen in terror for a moment, then flee in a blind panic as the king's monstrous roar summons the rest of the tribe. The narrative explodes into chaos. The scouts race back to the shore, the giants in thunderous pursuit. Back at the harbor, the horror unfolds on a massive scale. The Laestrygonians swarm the cliffs, and what seemed like a protective fortress moments before is now a weapon. They begin hurling boulders that are not mere stones, but man-sized rocks down onto the ships trapped in the calm water below. The sound must have been apocalyptic, the splintering of wood, the screams of men, the monstrous roars echoing off the cliffs. They spear the sailors as they flail in the water, and in a final, gut-wrenching detail, they carry them away not as defeated enemies but as food. Of the 12 ships in Odysseus's proud fleet, only one escapes, his own, moored just outside the narrow channel. He is forced to watch, helpless, as his entire company, his comrades and friends, are destroyed and consumed in a single bloody frenzy. This is Homer's haunting portrait, and it establishes the core of the Laestrygonian terror. Their cannibalism is not a ritual or a desperate act of starvation. It is their nature, as casual and brutal as a lion taking a gazelle. Their immense strength is not heroic but destructive, a force of nature weaponized against humanity itself. This single episode in the Odyssey does more than just present a monster. It dismantles the very idea of civilization, revealing a world where the rules of hospitality, mercy, and even war are meaningless in the face of an absolute consuming hunger. Yet Homer's description of their homeland is as strange and unsettling as the giants themselves, placing them not just anywhere, but in a landscape that feels twisted and wrong, a place existing at the very frayed edges of the map. This wasn't a typical island or coastal city. It was a geographic paradox, a land of perpetual daylight. The poet tells us that here, a herdsman driving his cattle home in the evening could meet a fellow herdsman just setting out with his flock. The first would be ending his day's work, while the second was just beginning his. And because of this endless overlap of day and night, the saying went that a man could earn double wages, one set for the labor of the day and another for the work of the night. This isn't just a charming folk tale, it's a profound cosmological clue. For the ancient Greeks, the regular, reliable cycle of sunrise and sunset was a cornerstone of a rational, ordered world. It was the rhythm that defined human life, labor, and rest. A place where this cycle broke down, where day and night bled into one another, was inherently unnatural. It was a liminal space, a threshold realm where the normal rules of reality no longer applied. This eternal daylight creates a sense of constant exposure, of a land where there is no comforting cloak of darkness in which to hide, no true rest. It's the perfect environment for a people who are always watching, always hunting, a place devoid of the privacy and cycles that define civilized life. The geography of their harbor magnifies this feeling of entrapment. Homer emphasizes the narrow entrance, a single tight channel that led into the calm, circular bay. Those unscalable cliffs that initially promised protection were in fact the walls of a perfect killing box. Imagine it from the perspective of a sailor. You navigate this one slender passage, and suddenly you're in a vast, placid pool, surrounded on all sides by immense rock faces. It feels safe because it is isolated, but the moment that safety proves false, those same cliffs become a prison. There is no easy escape, no way to quickly maneuver multiple ships. The narrow entrance that offered access now becomes a fatal bottleneck, a point where the entire fleet is trapped, penned in like livestock. The Laestrygonians didn't need to build walls or fortifications. Their home was a fortress designed by nature itself, a topographical snare that lured victims in with the promise of sanctuary before revealing its true, monstrous purpose. This combination of the temporally bizarre and the geographically predatory is what makes the Laestrygonians so uniquely terrifying. They aren't just monsters who happen to live in a cave, they are an intrinsic part of a hostile and alien landscape. Their home at the edge of the world is a place where logic is upended, where time itself is untrustworthy, and where the very earth conspires against human travelers. It's a powerful reflection of the ancient Greek worldview, which held that the further one traveled from the center of their known world, the more strange, chaotic, and dangerous the world became. The Laestrygonians were the literal embodiment of that distant horror, the inhabitants of a land where the sun never truly set, waiting in their perfect trap for the next fleet to wander in. At the very heart of this cannibalistic nightmare stands a family, not a faceless horde, but a distinct royal household that embodies the totality of the Laestrygonian horror. Their king, Antiphates, is introduced to us not through a decree or a speech, but through an act of pure, unrestrained savagery. When the Greek scouts are brought before his wife, her immense size is terrifying enough, but it is her reaction that sets the final, gruesome chain of events into motion. She doesn't greet them or question them, she simply bellows for her husband, and Antiphates arrives not with the deliberation of a ruler, but with the immediate, predatory hunger of a beast. In an instant, he snatches one of the men and devours him alive. This single action defines him completely. He is not a king who deliberates, he is a monster who consumes. His royalty affords him no civility, it merely grants him the first pick of the prey. His name itself is telling. Antiphates can be loosely interpreted as against speech or in retaliation, a name that perfectly encapsulates a being who responds to strangers not with words but with violence. He is the absolute monarch of this brutal realm, and his authority is demonstrated through his capacity for destruction, yet he is not a solitary fiend. His wife, whose name is not given by Homer but is later supplied by other sources as Telepylos or something similar, is far from a passive queen. She is the one who first lays eyes on the Greeks, and her response is to summon her husband for the kill. She is not startled or fearful, she is the catalyst. This paints a picture of a shared monstrous nature, where both partners in this royal marriage are equally invested in the savage practices of their people. She is not a delicate queen in a court of brutes, she is a partner in predation, a matron of monstrosity. Their daughter, the young woman encountered at the spring, completes this unsettling family portrait. She is the law. Her action of drawing water is a classically feminine, civilized task, a familiar sight that would instantly put strangers at ease. She is the friendly face that disarms suspicion, the gentle guide who leads the lambs to the slaughter. She directs the men straight to her father's house, knowing full well, or at least understanding implicitly, what awaits them there. This is not the innocent act of a child. It is the first phase of the hunt, a role she has clearly been raised to perform. This family unit is a microcosm of the entire Laestrygonian society, and its structure is fascinatingly inverted. While Antiphates delivers the ultimate violence, it is the women who initiate and facilitate it. The daughter secures the prey, the mother sounds the alarm, and the father executes the kill. This suggests a society where monstrousness is a shared familial trait, and where gender does not dictate one's role in the cycle of violence but rather enhances it. It's a perversion of the ideal Greek household, the oikos, which was meant to be a bastion of order, hospitality, and civilization. In the Laestrygonian palace, the home is not a sanctuary, it is the very heart of the abattoir. This dynamic raises a compelling question about their societal structure. Is there a matriarchal influence here? The women are certainly powerful and active participants, not secluded or subservient. The queen's command brings the king running, and the daughter operates independently and effectively as a scout. This could imply a society where female power is recognized and utilized, albeit for terrifying ends. Their monstrous nature isn't a male-dominated affair, it is a collaborative family enterprise. This makes them far more frightening than a lone male tyrant. Their horror is systemic, woven into the very fabric of their family life, passed down from parent to child. The daughter at the spring is a chilling reminder that this brutality is not an aberration. It is their tradition, their normal, a legacy that ensures the next generation will continue to guard their treacherous harbor. The return of the few surviving scouts was not an orderly retreat but a frantic, desperate race against certain death. Their faces pale with a terror beyond anything they had known, they stumbled down the path toward the harbor, their shouts of warning tearing through the peaceful air. But their panic was a whisper against the coming thunder. From the cliffs above, a monstrous roar answered their cries, a sound that seemed to shake the very stone under their feet. In that moment, the serene harbor transformed from a sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. The Laestrygonians had come. They emerged not as a small war party, but as an entire population of giants, hundreds strong, their massive forms lining the cliff tops like a forest of terrible statues. The scale of the force was overwhelming, a whole civilization united in a single predatory purpose. There was no parley, no demand for surrender, only the immediate and absolute unleashing of violence. The first horror came from the sky. The giants bent down, tearing enormous rocks from the cliff face itself. What they held were not mere stones, but boulders larger than a man, the foundational bones of the land turned into weapons. With terrifying, casual strength, they began to hurl them downward. The air filled with a deafening whistle as these projectiles rained upon the fleet trapped in the calm, glassy water below. The sound of impact was catastrophic. The proud, sea-worthy ships of Odysseus, which had weathered the storms of Poseidon and the temptations of Circe, were instantly reduced to splinters. Hulls carved from mighty oaks exploded under the force. Masts, once tall enough to catch the wind across vast oceans, snapped like twigs. The scene was one of pure, chaotic destruction, a symphony of shattering wood and the shrieks of men who suddenly found the solid deck beneath them vanishing into the bloody foam. But the horror was only beginning. For the men thrown into the water, there was no escape. The giants, some wading directly into the harbor, others leaning from the cliffs, held enormous spears. They did not engage in combat, they went fishing. They skewered the struggling, flailing sailors with chilling precision, lifting them from the water as they might impale a catch from a stream. The water, once so clear and still, churned crimson, the screams of the dying echoing off the encircling stone walls, amplifying the nightmare into an inescapable cacophony. This was not a battle, it was an extermination. The giants worked with a brutal, practiced efficiency, demonstrating that this was not their first such feast. They smashed every ship they could reach, speared every man in the water, and in the most gut-wrenching detail of all, they began to gather the bodies. They hauled the broken, lifeless forms of Odysseus's comrades back to their city, not as trophies of war, but as provisions. The cannibalism that began in the king's hall was now enacted on a mass scale, the entire cove becoming a butcher's shop for a race of inhuman consumers. From his vantage point, Odysseus on his own ship, which was fortuitously moored just outside the narrow channel, could only watch in paralyzed horror. He witnessed the complete and utter annihilation of his command. 11 of his 12 ships were utterly destroyed. Hundreds of his men, his friends, his crew, veterans of the Trojan War who had survived a decade of siege, were killed and consumed in a matter of minutes. The scale of the loss is almost incomprehensible. This single, brief encounter cost him more men than any other episode in his entire 10-year journey home. It was a blow from which his expedition never truly recovered, a massacre that left him isolated, traumatized, and with a crew so small it felt more like a ghost ship than a victorious fleet. The tranquil harbor was now a silent, haunted graveyard, the only remnants of his proud fleet a vast debris field of splintered wood and the lingering, metallic scent of blood on the air. While Homer's account gives us the visceral, terrifying core of the story, our understanding of the Laestrygonians is actually pieced together like a mosaic from other, far more fragmented sources. The world of ancient Greek literature is vast, and much of it has been lost to time, leaving us with tantalizing hints and whispers about these giants from authors who wrote in Homer's shadow. One of the most fascinating figures to weigh in was not a poet but the revered historian Thucydides. In his monumental work, The History of the Peloponnesian War, he pauses in an early section to speculate on the earliest inhabitants of Sicily. He mentions that the Cyclops and the Laestrygonians were said to have lived in certain parts of the island long before his own time. This is a staggering shift in perspective. Thucydides, a man dedicated to rational inquiry and factual evidence, is treating the Laestrygonians not as pure myth, but as a legendary memory of a people who might have actually existed. He wasn't necessarily claiming they were literal giants, but rather that the stories about them could be distorted recollections of fierce, early tribes that once occupied the coastal regions of Sicily. This historical lens transforms them from abstract monsters into a potential explanation for the unknown. For the ancient Greeks, strange ruins, massive bones found in the earth, or tales from distant traders could easily be woven into the fabric of their existing mythology. A particularly tall or robust tribe encountered by early explorers might over generations of storytelling evolve into a race of cannibalistic giants. Thucydides' brief comment opens a door to a world where myth and prehistory blur, suggesting that the horror of the Laestrygonians might have been rooted in a genuine, if forgotten, cultural encounter. Beyond historical speculation, we have glimpses of the Laestrygonians in the fractured remains of the epic cycle. This was a collection of epic poems that, together with the Iliad and Odyssey, told the entire story of the Trojan War and its aftermath. Most of these works are lost, surviving only in summaries by later scholars and fragments quoted by other authors. One of the most significant of these was the Telegony, a poem attributed to a bard named Eugamon of Cyrene. This epic continued the story of Odysseus after the events of Homer's Odyssey, following him right up to his death. While the existing summary of the Telegony is frustratingly brief, we know that it involved Odysseus traveling to various lands. Given that the Laestrygonians represented his single greatest loss, it is entirely plausible, even likely, that the poem revisited their myth in some way. Perhaps Odysseus returned for vengeance, or perhaps their legacy continued to haunt him. We simply don't know, and that absence is a profound loss for mythology. These lost epics remind us that Homer's version was not the only one. The world of Greek myth was a living, evolving tradition, with different city-states and poets adding their own details and variations. The Laestrygonians we know from the Odyssey might have been just one incarnation, and the full tapestry of their story, including their origins and ultimate fate, may have been far more complex. Later poets and mythographers, like the Roman writer Hyginus in his Fabulae, also kept the memory alive, often simplifying and cataloguing the myths for a new age. They repeated the core story, ensuring its survival, but rarely added the rich, atmospheric detail that Homer provided. This fragmented nature of our sources is crucial to grasp. We are looking at the Laestrygonians through a shattered mirror. We have Homer's vivid, terrifying portrait, Thucydides' historical curiosity, and the ghostly echoes from lost poems like the Telegony. This patchwork of evidence means that many of our most burning questions remain unanswered. Where did the Laestrygonians ultimately come from? Who were their parents in the intricate family tree of the Greek gods? What happened to them after Odysseus escaped? The ancient texts outside of Homer give us hints and possibilities, but they ultimately leave the deepest origins of these cannibal giants shrouded in a darkness as profound as their cliff-walled harbor. So were the Laestrygonians purely the invention of a poet's dark imagination, symbolic monsters meant to terrify, or could they be something else, a distorted echo of a real historical encounter? This question pushes us beyond the text of the Odyssey and into a fascinating debate about where myth ends and memory begins. One powerful interpretation views them as profound symbols, archetypes of primal fear. Think about the core elements of their story: the treacherous landscape, the absolute violation of hospitality, and of course the cannibalism. These aren't just random scary details, they tap into the deepest anxieties of an ancient Greek audience. For a civilization that prized the sea for trade and expansion, the ocean was also a place of immense dread. Uncharted coastlines held unknown perils, and the story of a perfect harbor that is actually a death trap is the ultimate cautionary tale for any sailor. It embodies the fear that the very thing you need for survival, shelter, fresh water, could be your undoing. Then there's the cannibalism, the most potent taboo. In the Greek worldview, the act of eating human flesh was what separated civilized humanity from the beasts and the monstrous. It represented a complete collapse of moral order. The Laestrygonians, therefore, can be seen as the ultimate other. They are not just enemies, they are the antithesis of everything Greek society stood for: law, hospitality, community, and restraint. Their casual, predatory consumption of humans makes them walking symbols of chaos, a literal embodiment of the consuming unknown that waited at the edge of the map. They are the psychological manifestation of every explorer's nightmare, the fear that what lies beyond the horizon isn't just different, but actively, ravenously hostile. This symbolic reading is compelling because it explains their enduring power. They are more than just big, strong monsters. They represent the fragility of civilization itself when confronted with a nature that is utterly savage and amoral. Yet there is a competing, equally intriguing theory that grounds these giants in a potential historical reality. Could the Laestrygonians be a folk memory, a story that grew in the telling from a real, traumatic meeting between early Greek explorers and an indigenous tribe? The great historian Thucydides, as we mentioned, pointed to Sicily as their legendary home, but other ancient sources and modern archaeological theories point strongly toward Sardinia. The Nuragic civilization of Sardinia, known for its impressive and mysterious stone tower fortresses called Nuragi, fits the Homeric description in startling ways. These nuragi, often built on high ground overlooking the coast, could easily be imagined by terrified sailors as the imposing stone structures of a giant race. The Nuragic people were skilled with bronze weaponry and were a formidable insular culture. A chance encounter between a lost Greek fleet and the warriors of this unfamiliar civilization could have been brutally violent. If the Nuragic people were, on average, more robust and taller than the Greeks, a possibility given nutritional and genetic differences, that physical distinction could have been exaggerated over generations of storytelling into a race of giants. The practice of hurling large stones from cliffs onto ships below doesn't require supernatural strength. It's a simple and effective defensive tactic for a coastal people. Even the cannibalism, while likely a mythological exaggeration, could have roots in ritual practices misunderstood by outsiders, or simply been a terrifying slander used to paint a hostile tribe as subhuman monsters. This idea of a folk memory is how mythology often works. It takes a kernel of truth, a strange land, a fierce people, a disastrous battle, and over centuries of oral tradition, embellishes it into an epic confrontation with the monstrous. The Laestrygonians, in this light, are not just symbols but the ghost of a genuine cultural collision, a story born from the shock and trauma of the early Greek expansion into the Western Mediterranean. It represents the real dangers of exploration, where a foreign language, unfamiliar customs, and a defensive, powerful local population could easily be interpreted by frightened sailors as a confrontation with literal monsters. So, which is it? Are they symbolic or historical? The most satisfying answer is that they are likely both. The Laestrygonians are a powerful fusion of a potent psychological archetype, the consuming unknown, and the amplified memory of very real, very dangerous encounters at the frontier of the ancient world. They are the myth that was born because the reality was terrifying enough to require a monstrous explanation. If the tranquil, deadly harbor of Telepylos was a real place, where on our map could we possibly pin such a nightmare? Sailors and scholars for centuries have tried to chart Odysseus's voyage, and the location of the Laestrygonians has been one of its most stubborn mysteries. The descriptions in the Odyssey, while fantastical, are also incredibly specific, offering clues that have led investigators to some very real and dramatic coastlines. Let's navigate through the most compelling candidates, starting with what many now consider the frontrunner, the rugged north coast of Sardinia. Here, the landscape doesn't just resemble Homer's description, it seems to scream it from the cliffs. The area around the modern town of Castellsardo is a spectacle of sheer limestone cliffs plunging into a deep blue sea, with numerous sheltered inlets and coves that perfectly match the narrow entrance leading to a circular, protected harbor. These natural harbors are stunningly beautiful yet feel inherently isolated and imposing, exactly the kind of place that would lure a weary sailor into a fatal sense of security. But the most striking evidence isn't just the water, it's what stands on the land. Scattered across the Sardinian highlands are the remnants of the Nuragic civilization, the Nuragi. These are mysterious, ancient stone towers, often built on strategic high points with commanding views of the coast. They are monumental structures built with massive, interlocking stones without mortar, a construction technique that later Greeks would call Cyclopean, believing only giants could have moved such immense rocks. To a terrified Greek scout looking up from a beach, what would a Nuragic tower look like silhouetted against the sky? It wouldn't seem like a human fortress, it would look like the dwelling of a giant. The correlation is almost too perfect, a race of giants living in Cyclopean towers overlooking a treacherous, cliff-lined coast. It provides a powerful, tangible origin for the myth, suggesting that the Laestrygonians were a folk memory of the formidable and perhaps hostile Nuragic people encountered by early Mediterranean explorers. Another strong contender, and one favored by some ancient writers like Thucydides, lies just off the toe of Italy's boot, the Strait of Messina in Sicily. This narrow channel of water has its own legendary pedigree, being the supposed home of the sea monsters Scylla and Charybdis. The strait is a place of powerful, conflicting currents and treacherous winds, a natural danger zone for ancient shipping. Proponents of this theory point to the area's dramatic geography, with its high cliffs and the ever-present threat of being dashed against the rocks. They argue that early seafarers experiencing the very real perils of this passage could have easily woven tales of a monstrous race lying in wait. Combining the very real threat of the strait with the legend of the giants creates a composite horror, a single region so dangerous it bred multiple monsters. Some have even looked much further afield, to the coast of the Black Sea. This theory connects the Laestrygonians to older myths from Anatolia and beyond, suggesting that the story is a fragment of a much older pan-Mediterranean legend that was later grafted onto Odysseus's journey. The idea of a land with endless daylight could be a distorted traveler's account of the far north's midnight sun, a phenomenon that would have seemed utterly alien and unnatural to a Greek audience. While this theory is more speculative, it speaks to the universal nature of the fear the Laestrygonians represent, the terror of the absolute unknown, of a world so distant its very laws of nature are inverted. Each of these locations presents a fascinating case, blending Homer's poetic clues with the hard rock of geography and archaeology. The Sardinian theory feels the most grounded, offering a direct link between the myth and a specific formidable culture. The Sicilian theory ties the giants to one of the most notoriously dangerous waterways in the ancient world, and the Black Sea hypothesis reminds us that these stories could travel vast distances, evolving as they went. Perhaps the true power of the myth is that Telepylos isn't meant to be found on any single map. It exists wherever the inviting shoreline hides a fatal secret, wherever the unfamiliar landscape turns predatory. It is the archetypal "here be dragons" on the mental chart of every explorer, a warning that has been placed at one time or another on every distant and dangerous coast. To fully grasp the horror the Greeks felt toward the Laestrygonians, we need to place their cannibalism in a wider context, seeing it not as an isolated grotesquerie, but as part of a profound cultural boundary. For the ancient Greeks, the act of eating human flesh was the ultimate transgression, the absolute line in the sand that separated the civilized human from the barbaric monster, the ordered community from the chaotic wild. It was the marker of the other in its most extreme form, and the Laestrygonians were far from the only figures in their mythology to cross this line. They exist in a terrifying constellation of man-eaters, each highlighting a different facet of this primal fear. The most immediate and famous comparison is, of course, Polyphemus the Cyclops. The parallels are striking. Odysseus and his men enter a seemingly vacant cave, only to be trapped by a giant who seals the entrance with a massive rock. The Cyclops also devours Odysseus's men, smashing their heads against the ground and eating them whole. Yet there is a crucial distinction in their monstrosity. Polyphemus's cannibalism, while horrifying, feels almost pastoral, a brutal fact of his existence. He is a solitary shepherd, a primitive being who follows his hunger without any pretense of society. His violence is direct and personal, but it lacks the organized, communal scale of the Laestrygonians. With Polyphemus, you face a single, monstrous individual. With the Laestrygonians, you face an entire civilization of them, a society built around the consumption of human beings. This elevates their threat from a personal peril to a systemic one. Then we have figures like the Sphinx, a monster who tormented the city of Thebes. She didn't eat bodies in a literal sense, but she consumed the youth of the city, devouring any young man who failed to answer her riddle. Her cannibalism is more intellectual and ritualistic, a predatory act that targets the very future of a community. She represents a different kind of consumption, one that preys on ignorance and hopelessness. The Sphinx, the Cyclops, and the Laestrygonians all represent a world out of balance, a nature that is actively hostile to human life and order. But the Laestrygonians are perhaps the most pure and terrifying expression of this because their cannibalism is so casual, so integrated into their daily life. It's not a punishment for failing a riddle, nor is it the brutish habit of a lonely cave dweller. For King Antiphates and his people, eating a human is as natural as eating a loaf of bread. This normalcy is what makes them uniquely frightening. They are not aberrations, they are a functioning society that has completely inverted the Greek moral universe. This taboo was so powerful because it touched on the very foundations of Greek identity. The shared meal, the symposium, was a cornerstone of their culture, a ritual that reinforced social bonds, hospitality, and civilized discourse. To pervert that act into one of consumption of one's own kind was to unravel the fabric of society itself. It reduced humanity to the level of livestock, erasing the divine spark that the Greeks believed separated them from animals. When a hero like Hercules or Theseus defeated a cannibalistic monster, it wasn't just a physical victory, it was a philosophical one, a reaffirmation of order over chaos, of culture over raw, consuming nature. The Laestrygonians, therefore, stand as the ultimate representation of the unknown world that lay beyond the safe harbors of the Greek world. They are the embodiment of the fear that out there, at the edges of the map, were not just hostile people, but entire cultures for whom the most sacred rules of humanity meant nothing. Their cannibalism is the final, irrevocable proof of their monstrousness, a characteristic that ensured they would forever be remembered not as a foreign kingdom, but as a nightmare given form. To truly understand the Laestrygonians, we need to pull back the camera and see them not as an isolated horror, but as part of a much larger, more ancient conflict woven into the very fabric of Greek mythology, the perpetual war between order and chaos. This brings us to the towering figures of the gigantes, the primordial giants born from the blood of the castrated sky god, Uranus, as it fell upon the earth, his consort Gaia. Their origin story is one of elemental violence and retribution, and it positions them as fundamental enemies of the cosmic order established by the Olympian gods. The gigantes were not merely large people, they were embodiments of the Earth's raw, untamed power. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and titanic landslides given humanoid form. Their great war against Zeus and the Olympians, the Gigantomachy, was the ultimate battle for control of the cosmos, a clash where the very stability of the world hung in the balance. So where do the Laestrygonians fit into this epic, world-defining struggle? It's highly unlikely they were participants in the Gigantomachy itself, as that conflict was the domain of gods and the most primal giants. Instead, the Laestrygonians can be seen as a specific, localized tribe of these earth-born beings, a remnant population that survived that great war and continued to embody the chaotic, predatory principles of the old pre-Olympian world. They are the gigantes' philosophical cousins, sharing that same lineage of terrestrial savagery. Think of the Gigantomachy as the central, universe-spanning battle against the concept of chaos, while the Laestrygonians represent that same chaos manifesting in a specific, tangible, and horrifyingly personal way for humanity. They are the proof that even after the gods secured their victory, pockets of the old, wild, and monstrous earth remained, lurking at the very edges of the known world, waiting to consume any hero foolish enough to venture into their domain. This connection reframes the Laestrygonians from simple monsters into symbols of a world that refused to be fully tamed. Their immense strength and stone-hurling prowess directly mirror the earth-shaking power of the gigantes. Their home, with its sheer cliffs and treacherous landscape, isn't just a setting, it is an extension of their nature. They are quite literally of the earth, their fortress built from the very bones of Gaia, and they use the landscape itself as a weapon, just as the gigantes sought to overthrow the gods with the raw power of the planet. This makes Odysseus's encounter with them far more significant than a simple escape from cannibals. It becomes a microcosmic reenactment of the Gigantomachy on a human scale. Odysseus, embodying the cunning and resourcefulness prized by the new Olympian order, is pitted against a remnant of the very chaos the gods had to conquer. His survival and the destruction of his fleet are not just a personal tragedy, but a stark reminder that the victory of civilization over primal nature is never complete or guaranteed. The Laestrygonians represent the ever-present threat of a regression, a world where the rules do not apply and where the raw, consuming hunger of the earth can still rise up to shatter the works of men. Their cannibalism is the ultimate expression of this. It is nature not just as a hostile force, but as a consuming one, a force that incorporates human civilization into its own savage cycle, reducing ordered society to mere sustenance. In this light, every Greek hero who ventured into the unknown was in a way a soldier in this ongoing, cold war against the remnants of the gigantes, and the Laestrygonians were one of its most terrifying and effective garrisons. Their very name, Laestrygonians, carries a chilling weight, a linguistic artifact that might hold a key to their true nature. Unpacking its syllables is like sifting through the ruins of a forgotten language, revealing a history that could be even darker and more ancient than the story Homer tells us. The most direct and compelling interpretation connects them to the Greek word Leister, which means a robber, a pirate, or more specifically, a kind of armed ruffian who preys on others. This derivation feels almost too perfect. It paints them not as accidental monsters, but as deliberate predators. They aren't just cannibals, they are raiders, pirates of the most extreme kind, who don't just take treasure but take life itself, consuming their victims in the most literal way possible. A Leister was a low-class, violent criminal, and linking the Laestrygonians to this term strips them of any noble or tragic quality. It frames their entire existence around a brutal, acquisitive violence, turning their cannibalism into the ultimate form of theft, stealing not just possessions but the very bodies of their enemies. This etymology supports the idea that in the Greek mindset, they were the embodiment of lawless predation, the antithesis of the heroic warrior who fights for glory. They were the pirates who waited at the edge of the world, for whom other humans were not adversaries but simply walking provisions. Yet, language is rarely that straightforward, and other scholars point to a more mysterious and arguably more fascinating possibility. The structure of the name Laestrygonian doesn't perfectly align with known Greek roots, leading to the theory that it might be a relic from a pre-Greek linguistic substrate, a word borrowed from the indigenous peoples of the Mediterranean long before the arrival of the Greeks themselves. This is a profound shift in perspective. If their name predates the Greek language, then the monsters themselves might predate the Greek myths we know. They could be figures from a much older, possibly non-Hellenic stratum of mythology, adopted and adapted into the epic of Odysseus. Imagine a time before the Olympian gods were widely worshipped, when the lands around the Aegean were home to different cultures with their own pantheons and their own terrifying creatures. The story of a race of coastal giants who devoured sailors could have been a local legend, a cautionary tale told by the people of Sardinia or Sicily for generations. Then, as early Greek explorers and colonists began to interact with these regions, they heard these stories. They encountered the formidable Nuraghi towers and the robust local warriors, and they fused these real-world encounters with the existing local folklore. The foreign name for these feared beings, something like Laestrygonians, was adopted into Greek along with the terrifying tale, becoming a permanent part of their own mythological landscape. This theory of a pre-Greek origin transforms the Laestrygonians from a simple monster into a cultural fossil. They become a bridge to a lost world, a whisper of the fears and beliefs of peoples whose voices have otherwise been silenced by history. It suggests that the deepest horrors in Greek mythology are not always homegrown. Sometimes they are imports, ancient terrors that were so potent they were absorbed into the mainstream. This also helps explain why their origins are so obscure in the standard Greek genealogies. Unlike, say, the Cyclops Polyphemus, who is clearly the son of Poseidon, the Laestrygonians have no clear divine parentage in the surviving text. They simply are. They exist as a complete, terrifying society without a detailed creation myth, which is exactly what you would expect if they were adopted whole cloth from another culture's belief system. Their name, then, is a locked box. The Leister theory gives us one key, framing them as archetypal robbers. But the pre-Greek theory offers a different, more tantalizing key, suggesting the box itself is older than we thought, and that the true horror inside is something even the Greeks themselves may have only partially understood, a remnant of a primordial fear from the very dawn of Mediterranean civilization. Homer provides us with no meticulous portrait, no detailed catalogue of their features. Instead, he masterfully sketches their terrifying reality through their actions and the sheer scale of their violence, leaving our minds to fill in the horrifying blanks. Their most defining characteristic is, without question, their immense size, a physicality that transcends mere tallness and enters the realm of the geographic. We are told they could pick up and hurl boulders that were not merely rocks but man-sized stones. Consider the physics of that for a moment. A boulder large enough to smash a seaworthy ship, a vessel built to withstand ocean gales, into splinters would be staggering in weight. For a single individual to lift such a rock overhead and cast it with enough force and accuracy to hit a moving ship from a cliff top speaks to a strength that is almost incomprehensible. This wasn't the athletic strength of a hero like Achilles. It was the raw, brute force of a landslide given humanoid form. Their size must have been colossal, perhaps 20 or 30 feet tall, with limbs like tree trunks and hands capable of engulfing a man's entire torso. When King Antiphates snatched one of Odysseus's scouts, he didn't grapple with him. He consumed him alive, an act that suggests a mouth and jaw large enough to make that horrifyingly feasible. Their footsteps would have echoed like small earthquakes, their voices booming like thunder rolling down from the cliffs. They were less a people and more a walking, hunting part of the landscape itself. Beyond their sheer scale, did these giants possess any other supernatural abilities, or was their terror rooted entirely in their physicality and their overwhelming numbers? The text of the Odyssey strongly suggests the latter, and this, in a way, makes them even more frightening. Unlike the Cyclops, who was the son of a god, or the sorceress Circe, who could transform men into swine, the Laestrygonians exhibit no explicit magic. They don't vanish in a puff of smoke, they don't cast spells, and they don't possess any obvious invulnerability. Their power appears to be entirely physical and tactical. They rely on their natural strength, their strategic use of the landscape, and their coordinated numbers. This grounding in a terrifyingly plausible reality is a key source of their horror. They are not defeated by a magical trick or a divine intervention, as Polyphemus is with the nomen rus and the blinding. Odysseus escapes them purely through luck and his ship's fortuitous positioning outside the harbor's narrow channel. There was no outsmarting them, no clever verbal game to play. Their simplicity is their strength. They represent a problem that cannot be solved by wit alone, only by flight. Their power is the power of a tsunami or a volcanic eruption, an unstoppable, mindless, natural force that simply obliterates whatever is in its path. This focus on raw physical power and coordination raises a compelling question about their society and intelligence. Were they simply rampaging, unintelligent brutes, or was there a chilling, predatory cunning at work? Their actions suggest a sophisticated, if brutal, intelligence. The design of their homeland, Telepylos, is a perfect natural trap, indicating they either sought out or fully understood how to use their geography to maximum lethal effect. The use of their daughter as a seemingly innocent lure at the spring demonstrates our understanding of psychology and deception. They didn't just attack on sight, they drew their prey in, letting them moor their ships and lower their guard before unleashing the cataclysm. The attack itself was not a disorganized mob scene. It was a coordinated assault with hundreds of giants appearing simultaneously on the cliffs, working in unison to rain down destruction. This points to a society with a command structure likely centered on their king, Antiphates, and the ability to execute a complex, large-scale ambush. They weren't just strong, they were organized in their strength, making them a truly formidable military force. Their intelligence was not the kind that built philosophy or poetry, but the sharp, practical intelligence of the ultimate ambush predator, a quality that makes their threat far more calculated and terrifying than mere mindless savagery. Ultimately, the true power of the Laestrygonians may lie in this very fusion of the physical and the psychological. Their immense size and strength created a primal, visceral fear, the fear of being physically overwhelmed, crushed, and consumed. But it was their use of deception, their patient coordination, and their mastery of a treacherous environment that created a deeper, more insidious dread, the fear of being outmaneuvered, of having your own need for safety and hospitality turned into the very instrument of your destruction. They were a force that attacked both the body and the mind, shattering not only the Greek ships but also the very Hellenic ideals of cunning and resourcefulness. In the face of such overwhelming and organized physical power, the heroic virtues of Odysseus were rendered almost meaningless, leaving only the stark, desperate instinct for survival. While we can analyze their size, their tactics, and their mythological lineage, the true, enduring terror of the Laestrygonians strikes at something far more primal than any of those things. It taps into a horror that is wired into our very psyche, the fear of being consumed. This isn't merely the fear of death, which is universal. It is the specific, profound dread of becoming food, of having your body, your physical self, obliterated and incorporated into the body of your devourer. Homer understood this distinction on a fundamental level, and he weaponized it in his narrative to create a sense of violation and despair that goes beyond any battlefield death. In a conventional war, even a brutal one, a fallen warrior's body might be stripped of armor, but it typically remains his. There is a chance, however slim, for burial rites, for remembrance, for a name to be etched onto a stele. His existence, in memory at least, retains its integrity. The Laestrygonians annihilate that possibility completely. When Antiphates devours a man alive, and when his people spear the sailors and carry them off for a feast, they are not just killing them, they are erasing them. They are converting a thinking, feeling, speaking human being with a history and a name into mere sustenance, into fuel for the very monsters that destroyed them. This is the ultimate dehumanization. It reduces a person to their absolute biological utility, stripping away every layer of culture, identity, and soul. For the ancient Greek audience, this was the deepest conceivable violation. Their beliefs about the afterlife were intimately tied to the proper treatment of the body. Without burial, the soul was condemned to wander the banks of the river Styx for 100 years, unable to find peace. The Laestrygonians, through their cannibalism, enacted a spiritual death sentence even more horrific than the physical one. They denied their victims not only their lives but also their eternity, consuming their future in the underworld along with their flesh. This theme of consumption as the absolute loss of self resonates across countless human cultures. In folklore and myth worldwide, monsters that eat humans, ogres, witches, wendigos are consistently among the most feared. They represent a regression to a state before law, before society, before the sacred separation between person and prey. The fear isn't just that they are strong, but that their very nature seeks to unravel our own. Homer magnifies this horror by contrasting it with one of the bedrock principles of his civilization, xenia, the sacred law of hospitality. This wasn't mere politeness, it was a divine contract between host and guest, a ritualized trust that made travel and communication possible in a dangerous world. A stranger at your door was under the protection of Zeus himself. The Laestrygonians pervert this sacred custom in the most grotesque way imaginable. Their daughter at the spring plays the part of the hospitable guide, leading the strangers to her home, but the welcome they receive is a monstrous inversion. Instead of offering bread and salt, the host offers his guests a place on his menu. This betrayal of xenia is more than a social faux pas. It signals a complete moral inversion. It tells the audience that in this land, the very gods that guarantee safety and order have no power. The rules have not just been broken, they have been replaced by a single, brutal law: you are what you eat. This creates a pervasive sense of vulnerability and despair that clings to the entire episode. Odysseus, the man of countless tricks and escapes, is rendered utterly helpless. His famed Metis, his cunning intelligence, is useless here. There is no riddle to solve, no monster to outwit with a clever pseudonym. There is only the overwhelming, physical reality of being hunted and consumed. He cannot fight them, he can only flee. The despair is palpable not just in the screams of the dying men, but in the silence that follows. Odysseus is left with a single ship and a handful of men, forced to sail away from a harbor that has literally consumed his community. The psychological impact of this mass consumption would have been catastrophic. It wasn't just the loss of comrades, it was the witnessing of their utter annihilation as entities. This event scars Odysseus's journey forever, a constant reminder that the world contains horrors against which even the greatest hero is powerless, horrors that don't just kill you but erase you from existence itself. This archetype of the devouring giant, it turns out, is not unique to the rocky shores of the Mediterranean. Across the globe, from the frozen forests of North America to the frozen peaks of Scandinavia, cultures with no contact with each other have dreamed up strikingly similar monsters, suggesting that the fear of being consumed by something immense and inhuman is a fundamental part of the human experience. One of the most haunting parallels comes from the Algonquian peoples of North America with the legend of the Wendigo. This is not merely a giant, but a spirit of insatiable hunger, born from the desperation of winter and the taboo of cannibalism. The Wendigo is often depicted as a gaunt, skeletal figure, towering and emaciated, with lips perpetually slashed from its own ravenous chewing. Its heart is made of ice, and the more it eats, the hungrier it becomes. The Wendigo is not just a physical threat, it is a psychological one, a personification of starvation and the moral decay that can follow when survival instincts override humanity. While the Laestrygonians are a communal, almost societal evil, the Wendigo often represents an individual's transformation into a monster through a single, damning act. Both creatures, however, share the core horror of cannibalism as an unstoppable, consuming force, a hunger that defines their entire existence and reduces human beings to mere food. Traveling to the frozen north of Europe, we encounter the Jötnar of Norse mythology, the giants who are the ancient adversaries of the gods of Asgard. Like the Laestrygonians, the Jötnar are frequently portrayed as immense, chaotic, and deeply connected to the wild, untamed forces of nature. They are the embodiments of earthquakes, blizzards, and the crushing cold, living in the desolate realm of Jotunheim. While not all Jötnar are cannibals, the theme of consumption is powerfully present. The most famous example is the wolf Fenrir, a son of the god Loki and a giantess, who is prophesied to devour the god Odin during the cataclysm of Ragnarok. This act of cosmic consumption echoes the Laestrygonian feast on a grand, world-ending scale. Other Jötnar, like Thrym, who steals Thor's hammer, or the various giants who threaten the gods in the poetic Eddas, represent a constant, encroaching chaos that seeks to overwhelm the order of the divine world. The Laestrygonians are a localized, territorial threat to human heroes, while the Jötnar are a cosmological threat to the gods themselves. Yet both serve a similar function. They are the other, the primordial chaos that civilization, whether mortal or divine, must constantly battle to maintain its existence. Their immense size and strength symbolize the overwhelming power of nature, and their willingness to consume reflects a world where the rules of society do not apply. Venturing further, we find this archetype woven into the rich tapestries of African and Asian mythologies. Across many West African traditions, there are stories of monstrous, often giant-like figures who capture and eat humans. These beings, sometimes called Ogboneboli, or appearing in the tales of trickster gods like Anansi, serve as cautionary figures, often punishing greed, arrogance, or the violation of social taboos. In the folklore of the Philippines, the kappa is a giant tree-dwelling creature that, while not always overtly hostile, can be dangerous and is part of a broader category of mythological beings that reflect a respect for and fear of the untamed wilderness. In the Himalayas, Tibetan and Nepalese lore speaks of the Yeti, a massive, ape-like creature of the mountains. While modern depictions often soften it, older legends sometimes attribute a fearsome, predatory nature to it, a remnant of the ancient fear of being hunted by something stronger and utterly alien in the most inaccessible places on Earth. Even in the ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, the hero and his companion Enkidu must face the monstrous giant Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, whose very face is made of coiled intestines and whose roar is a flood. While Humbaba's cannibalism is not explicit, his role as a terrifying, otherworldly guardian of a place humans are not meant to enter shares a kinship with the Laestrygonians as wardens of a deadly, forbidden space. What does this global chorus of cannibal giants tell us? It points to a universal archetype, a collective nightmare born from shared human anxieties. Before written history, our ancestors faced very real, very large predators. The fear of being hunted by bears, big cats, or other megafauna is etched into our DNA. The cannibal giant is the mythological amplification of that primal memory, a symbol of nature red in tooth and claw, personified into a thinking, stalking horror. Furthermore, these monsters often guard the boundaries of the known world. The Laestrygonians live at the edge of the map, the Wendigo haunts the deep, lonely woods, and the Jotnar dwell in the icy wastes beyond the realm of the gods. They are the psychological guardians of the frontier, representing the dangers of the unknown, the consequences of venturing too far from the safety of the tribe, the village, or the city walls. Their cannibalism is the ultimate expression of that danger, the fear that the unknown doesn't just kill you, but absorbs you, leaving no trace behind. So, while the Laestrygonians are a uniquely Greek horror, their essence is a human one. They are part of a vast, dark family tree of giants that stretches across every continent, a testament to the fact that no matter where or when we live, we have always shared the same terrifying dream of being small and vulnerable and utterly, completely consumable. While Homer's words painted the nightmare in the mind's eye, ancient Greek artists faced the tangible challenge of bringing the Laestrygonian terror to life on the curved surfaces of clay vases and the flat plains of frescoes. Their depictions are fascinating not just for what they show, but for the creative problems they had to solve. How do you illustrate a giant on a pot meant for holding wine? How do you convey the sheer chaos of a massacre within a single, static frame? The solutions they found give us a unique window into how this myth was visualized and understood in the ancient world. One of the most common and powerful motifs is the act of hurling the boulder. We see this on surviving red figure and black figure pottery, where a Laestrygonian, often depicted as a heavily armored hoplite warrior but on a vastly larger scale, is shown in the dynamic posture of throwing a massive rock downward. The artist conveys the giant's size not necessarily by making him taller than the surrounding cliffs, but through clever use of proportion and perspective. A Greek sailor might be shown tiny in comparison, his ship a mere toy next to the giant's foot or the enormous stone in his hand. This drastic difference in scale is the primary visual shorthand for their monstrous nature. The scene is almost always one of violent action, frozen in a moment of supreme catastrophe. The giant's body is coiled with effort, his muscles straining, capturing the physical power that Homer described. Another recurring and visceral image is the spearing of the sailors. Artists did not shy away from this brutality. We see depictions of giants wading into the water, their enormous spears poised to strike the small, helpless figures struggling in the waves below. This motif emphasizes the helplessness of the Greeks and the casual, predatory nature of the Laestrygonians. It's not a battle, it's a hunt. The Greeks are often shown nude, which was the conventional way to represent heroes or warriors in Greek art, but in this context, their nudity makes them look even more vulnerable and exposed against the heavily armed, colossal attackers. This contrast heightens the sense of violation and one-sided slaughter. Perhaps the most ingenious artistic solution was the use of multiple registers or sequential storytelling on a single vessel. Since a single scene couldn't capture the entire narrative from the peaceful arrival to the horrific feast, artists would often break the story into key moments. One register might show the Greeks cautiously arriving at the harbor, while the register directly above shows the boulders already raining down and the ship splintering. This allows the viewer to read the progression of the tragedy around the pot's circumference, creating a visual narrative that unfolds in the viewer's hands. It's a powerful technique that compensates for the static nature of the medium, giving a sense of before, during, and after the attack. However, these depictions also reveal the inherent limitations of the form. The chaotic, panoramic horror Homer describes the screams of hundreds of men, the roar of collapsing cliffs, the crimson churning of the water, is difficult to compress into a single image. The artist must choose one defining moment, and in doing so, the overwhelming sensory overload of the epic is necessarily simplified into a symbolic act of violence. Furthermore, the giants themselves are often portrayed as oversized humans rather than truly monstrous beings. They wear Greek armor, they move like Greek warriors, they lack the distorted, terrifying features we might imagine. This is partly due to artistic convention. Greek art was deeply rooted in the idealized human form, even for its monsters. The true monstrosity of the Laestrygonians was communicated through their actions and their scale relative to their victims, rather than through grotesque physicality. This artistic choice makes them somehow more frightening. They are a perversion of the human form, a civilization that looks familiar but operates on a scale, and with a morality that is utterly alien and destructive. Examining these ancient artworks does more than just illustrate a story. It shows us how the Greeks themselves grappled with visualizing the ultimate violation of their world order. Every painted pot depicting a spear piercing a tiny sailor was a reinforcement of the myth's power, a tangible reminder that even for a culture that produced such breathtaking beauty, the darkness at the edge of the map was always present, waiting to be remembered. When the Roman poets turned their gaze to the myths of Greece, they were never simply copying. They were reforging, reshaping these ancient tales to reflect the values, anxieties, and imperial identity of Rome itself. The Laestrygonians, those primal agents of chaos, underwent a fascinating transformation in this process, becoming less standalone monsters and more integrated components of a grander, distinctly Roman narrative of destiny and order. In the hands of Virgil, Rome's great epic poet, the giants make a chilling, almost cinematic cameo that reframes their entire purpose. In Book 3 of the Aeneid, Aeneas and his Trojan refugees, like Odysseus before them, are desperately seeking a safe harbor after their own long wanderings. They sight a promising cove, and the description Virgil uses is deliberately Homeric, echoing the deadly calm of Telepylos. The Trojans, remembering the warnings of the harpy Celaeno, immediately cry out in terror that this is the very home of the savage Laestrygonians. They flee without even setting foot on shore. This single moment is a masterstroke of literary reference and cultural commentary. For Virgil's Roman audience, the Laestrygonians are no longer a shocking, new horror to be discovered. They are a known quantity, a legendary danger already mapped and catalogued from their Greek reading. Their power now lies not in surprise, but in their established reputation. More importantly, their role is to highlight the profound difference between Aeneas and Odysseus. Odysseus, the quintessential Greek hero, relies on personal cunning and often walks directly into danger to test his wits. Aeneas, the proto-Roman hero, is defined by his piety and his devotion to a divine mandate, the founding of Rome. He doesn't need to face the Laestrygonians. He heeds the warnings of the gods and avoids them entirely. This avoidance is not an act of cowardice, but of supreme Roman virtue. It represents a rejection of the chaotic, individualistic heroism of the Greek past in favor of a disciplined, collective purpose aimed at building a stable, ordered world where such monsters have no place. In Virgil's epic, the Laestrygonians serve as a dark mile marker on the journey toward civilization, a peril that must be circumnavigated by the righteous, not confronted by the clever. Ovid, always the master of metamorphosis and psychological detail, takes a different, more intimate approach in his metamorphoses. He doesn't give us a full-scale raid, but instead focuses on the cannibalism itself, weaving it into the tragic and violent history of the House of Tereus. In this infamous tale, the Thracian king Tereus, after raping his sister-in-law Philomela and cutting out her tongue, is served a feast by his wife Procne, who has discovered his crime. The main course is their own son, Ites, whom Procne has slaughtered in a fit of vengeful madness. As Tereus devours the flesh of his child, Ovid delivers a devastating simile. He compares the king to a Laestrygonian gorging on human limbs. This is a profound reinterpretation of the myth. Ovid internalizes the Laestrygonian horror. The monster is no longer an external, environmental threat from the edge of the world. The monster is a potential within the human heart, within the family, within the civilized palace itself. Tereus's cannibalism is not a matter of racial nature or hunger, but a consequence of his own monstrous actions. His violation of family bonds has literally reduced his world to a cannibalistic nightmare. By linking Tereus to the Laestrygonians, Ovid suggests that the ultimate savagery is not that of the alien giant, but that of the corrupted human who betrays the very foundations of society. The Laestrygonians, in Ovid's hands, become a metaphor for the psychological and moral decay that can fester within a supposedly civilized space, a far cry from their Homeric role as external agents of chaos. So why did the Roman portrayals soften their standalone monstrousness? The answer lies in the Roman worldview. Roman culture, with its powerful state religion, its rigid legal codes, and its focus on the Pax Romana, had a different relationship with chaos. The Romans were builders and administrators, and their mythic history, as laid out by Virgil, was one of overcoming chaos to establish order. The giants of their own native tradition, such as the Titans or the creatures fought by Hercules, were often figures of a vanquished past, enemies overcome by gods or heroes to make way for Jupiter's reign and, by extension, Rome's ascendancy. Incorporating the Laestrygonians into this framework required taming them, making them part of a conquered landscape. They become a remembered danger, not a present one. Their symbolic purpose shifts from representing an ever-present, consuming unknown to representing the kind of barbaric, irrational forces that the Roman civilizing mission was destined to suppress. They are the chaotic past that the ordered Roman future has successfully left behind, a literary device used to showcase the superiority of Roman piety and collective destiny over Greek individualism and its attendant risks. The Roman reimagining, therefore, doesn't make the Laestrygonians less terrifying in the moment they appear, but it does place a cage of narrative and ideology around them. They are transformed from a fundamental force of nature into a milestone on the road to empire, a dark legend that only serves to make the light of Rome's destined glory shine all the brighter. Their terrifying journey from the cliffs of Telepylos did not end with the ancient world. The Laestrygonians, born from the darkest fears of Greek explorers, found new life in the literary imagination of later eras, their monstrous essence constantly reshaped to reflect the anxieties of each new age. Perhaps no single work carried them more dramatically into the medieval mindset than Dante Alighieri's Inferno. In Canto 18 of his epic journey through hell, Dante and his guide Virgil descend into the Eighth Circle, a place reserved for fraudsters. Here, in the first of its 10 evil pouches, Dante encounters the panderers and seducers, eternally whipped by demon overseers. And among these damned souls, he sees a shocking figure, a towering, wrathful giant. Dante names him explicitly, calling him the one who o'er the rest is eminent, and for that fateful feast wept by his limbs in the firm rock confined Antaeus. Wait, Antaeus, the correction is crucial. While Dante was intimately familiar with classical mythology, he places the giant Antaeus, not the Laestrygonian king, in this specific pit of hell. This distinction is telling. For Dante, the structured, meticulously organized hell of Catholic theology required a different kind of monster. The Laestrygonians, as a collective cannibalistic society, didn't fit neatly into his schematic punishment for specific sins. Their sin was too primal, too all-encompassing. Instead, their legacy of immense earth-born power was inherited by other giants whom Dante encounters later at the very bottom of hell, frozen in the ice of Cocytus. These colossi, including Nimrod and Ephialtes, are portrayed as rebels against the divine order, their sheer size and strength making them symbols of a chaotic, unreasoning pride that stands in direct opposition to God's will. Dante's reinterpretation is a fascinating shift. He filters the classical monster through a Christian lens, transforming the Laestrygonians' physical threat into a spiritual one. Their cannibalism, the ultimate consumption of the body, is sublimated into the giants' role as jailers for the ultimate traitors like Judas, an act of spiritual consumption. Their home, the treacherous landscape, becomes the frozen, immobile prison of the ninth circle. In Dante's cosmology, the raw, chaotic force represented by the Laestrygonians is not merely a danger to sailors, but a fundamental threat to the entire divine hierarchy, a force that must be utterly immobilized and contained at the foundation of hell itself. This transformation from external threat to internal symbol reaches its zenith in the 20th century with James Joyce's monumental novel, Ulysses. The entire book is a sprawling, complex parallel to Homer's Odyssey, set in a single day in Dublin. Joyce reimagines the epic's events and characters in a modern, urban landscape, and his treatment of the Laestrygonians is a stroke of genius. The Homeric episode is transposed into the Laestrygonians chapter where the hero, Leopold Bloom, wanders the city at lunchtime. Joyce takes the literal cannibalism of the myth and turns it inward, transforming it into a powerful metaphor for the consuming, often brutal nature of modern life. As Bloom walks through Dublin, he is assaulted not by boulders, but by sensory overload and social vulgarity. The chapter is a whirlwind of hunger, both physical and emotional. Bloom observes the ravenous crowds devouring their food in noisy, unmannered ways, and the act of eating becomes a grotesque, almost animalistic spectacle. He sees a man greedily slurping soup, spooning the soup up loudly, hungrily, and the imagery is deliberately visceral, echoing the consumption of the Greek sailors. The city itself becomes the treacherous harbor, its streets and shops a labyrinth that threatens to swallow the individual. Joyce uses language itself as a weapon. The prose becomes fragmented, crowded with onomatopoeia and disjointed thoughts, mirroring the chaotic barrage of the giant's attack. Bloom, like Odysseus, feels a profound sense of alienation and revulsion. He is a thoughtful, sensitive man adrift in a world of crude, consuming appetites. The cannibalism is no longer about eating flesh, but about being consumed by the vulgarity, the noise, the sheer mass of humanity, and the petty cruelties of urban existence. Joyce brilliantly translates the primal fear of being physically destroyed and eaten into the modern anxiety of losing one's identity, of being psychologically assimilated and erased by the overwhelming forces of mass society. In this reading, the Laestrygonians are no longer giants on a cliff, but the man next to you at the pub, the relentless advertising, the gnawing hunger of unfulfilled desire. They are the cannibals of the soul in the modern metropolis. Beyond these two titans of literature, the Laestrygonians have crept into other works, their name and essence invoked to signal a particular kind of brutal, overwhelming consumption. In C.S. Lewis's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, part of the Chronicles of Narnia, the crew encounters the Dark Island, a place of pure, suffocating nightmares. While not named directly, the psychological terror and the sense of being consumed by one's own fears resonate with the Laestrygonian archetype of a landscape that preys upon those who enter. More explicitly, in Rick Riordan's popular Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, which reintroduces Greek mythology to a new generation, the Laestrygonians appear as recurring antagonists. Riordan presents them as modern-day, cannibalistic giants who blend into human society, often as overly aggressive fast food employees or brutish mobsters, a clever nod to their enduring connection to consumption and violence. This modern portrayal makes them immediate and recognizable threats, updating their predatory nature for an audience familiar with urban legends and consumer culture. The through line from Homer to Riordan is the monster's core identity as the ultimate consumer. Each era reinterprets what is being consumed. For the ancient Greeks, it was literal human flesh, a violation of the body and the soul's journey to the afterlife. For Dante, it was the divine order consumed by the sinful pride of rebellion. For Joyce, it was the individual's peace and identity consumed by the vulgar machinery of modern life. And for contemporary audiences, they can represent the mindless consumption of resources, information, or even personal attention in a hyper-connected world. Their literary legacy proves that the fear they embody is not static. It evolves because the nature of what threatens to consume us evolves. The Laestrygonians are a terrifyingly adaptable myth, a blank canvas onto which every society can project its own version of being swallowed whole, whether by a giant's jaw, a sinful nature, a crowded street, or the relentless scroll of a screen. They remind us that the harbor that promises refuge can still be a trap, and that the hungers of the world are many and they are always waiting. So how do you take a myth this terrifying and translate it from the page to the screen, making these giants feel as real and threatening to a modern audience as they did to ancient listeners? One of the most ambitious attempts to visualize this horror came in the star-studded 1997 television miniseries, The Odyssey, directed by Andrzej Konchalovsky. This production took on the monumental challenge of bringing Homer's entire epic to life, and its approach to the Laestrygonians offers a fascinating case study in adapting primal fear for a cinematic medium. The creative team faced a fundamental question right from the start. How do you portray a race of cannibal giants without making them look silly or like something from a cheap monster movie? Their solution was a blend of practical effects, clever camera work, and a focus on brutal, overwhelming force rather than elaborate creature design. When the Greek scouts first encounter the Laestrygonian princess at the spring, her immense size is established not through a towering actress in prosthetics, but through a classic cinematic technique, forced perspective. By placing the actress much closer to the camera than the actors playing the Greek scouts, and using a carefully calculated camera angle, the filmmakers create the powerful illusion that she is a giant looking down upon tiny men. This simple, almost old-fashioned method is remarkably effective because it plays on a visual trick that our brains readily accept, grounding the fantasy in a tangible reality. The true test, of course, was the harbor attack itself. Here, the miniseries had to convey the scale and chaos that Homer described. To achieve this, they relied heavily on a combination of detailed miniature models and early digital effects. The initial, peaceful wide shot of the fleet moored in the circular harbor was likely a beautifully crafted miniature, giving a sense of the perfect claustrophobic trap. Then, as the giants appear on the cliffs, the camera switches to live action, with actors on sets that were built to look like the top of a cliff, hurling prop boulders. The real magic, and the source of both the scene's power and its limitations by today's standards, came in the compositing. The filmmakers superimposed these live-action giants over the shots of the miniature ships, creating the illusion of rocks the size of small cars crashing down onto the tiny vessels. The splintering of the ships was achieved with practical effects, miniatures rigged to explode on cue, while the spearing of the sailors in the water was done with stuntmen and careful editing. The overall effect is one of impressive scope for a 1990s television budget. You get a genuine sense of the massacre scale, of dozens of giants working in unison to destroy an entire fleet. The horror is in the numbers and the relentless, coordinated violence. However, a critique of this portrayal must acknowledge where it necessarily falls short of the psychological depth of Homer's text. The giants themselves are largely presented as a homogeneous, roaring horde. We don't get a close-up on the terrifyingly casual cannibalism of King Antiphates, the act of eating the scout is either omitted or happens off-screen, replaced by the more visually spectacular destruction of the fleet. This choice makes sense from a production standpoint. Smashing ships is a bigger, more cinematic set piece, but it sacrifices the intimate, personal violation that makes the original so chilling. The horror in the miniseries is the horror of being in a catastrophic event. The horror in Homer is the horror of being seen as food by a civilized-seeming king. The miniseries captures the epic scale of the slaughter, but can only hint at the profound moral inversion that gives the myth its lasting power. This adaptation highlights the eternal challenge of bringing ancient monsters to life. Do you focus on the physical spectacle, or do you try to capture the more abstract psychological terror? For a mainstream audience, the spectacle of giant attacks is a more immediate and easily understood threat. The nuanced horror of betrayed hospitality and the existential dread of cannibalism are subtler, more difficult themes to convey in a short, action-packed sequence. The 1997 Odyssey chose the path of spectacular destruction, and in doing so, it gave viewers a memorable and visceral interpretation of one of mythology's most devastating ambushes, even if the deepest shadows of Homer's nightmare remain just beyond the frame. Consider the sheer physical reality of the ancient world for a moment. For the Greek sailor, the sea was a source of life and a pathway to fortune, but the coastline was an enigma. Every uncharted bay, every river mouth, every sheltered cove could mean fresh water and safe anchorage, or it could conceal a hostile tribe, a treacherous current, or a landscape that actively sought your death. This is the profound fear that the Laestrygonians crystallize. They are not merely monsters who live in nature. They are the conscious embodiment of a nature that is predatory, intelligent, and ravenously hostile. Their home, Telepylos, is not just a setting for their story. It is the very essence of their being, a character in its own right whose geographical features conspire with the giants to annihilate any who dare to enter. That narrow channel leading to a placid, circular harbor surrounded by unscalable cliffs is the perfect metaphor for a beautiful, natural trap. It offers everything a weary sailor could pray for: calm water, shelter from the wind, and a gentle slope leading inland. But this apparent sanctuary is a topographical lie. The moment the trap is sprung, those protective cliffs become the walls of an abattoir, and the narrow entrance becomes an inescapable bottleneck. The landscape itself turns from a passive backdrop into an active participant in the slaughter. This reflects a very real, lived experience for ancient explorers. A beautiful, forested coastline could hide a fever-ridden swamp. A calm lagoon could be the hunting ground for crocodiles or sharks. The myth amplifies this genuine peril into a cosmic principle, suggesting that at the farthest edges of the world, the very earth is not just indifferent but malicious. Then there is the bizarre and deeply unsettling quality of the light itself. Homer's mention of the land where a herdsman meeting another could be either ending his day or beginning it, a place of such blurred boundaries that a man could earn double wages, is far more than a quaint folk detail. For a civilization that structured its entire existence around the reliable rhythms of sunrise and sunset, this perpetual, ambiguous daylight would be profoundly disorienting. It erases the fundamental cycle of work and rest, of safety and danger. Night provides cover, a time to hide, to regroup, to feel a semblance of security. In a land without true darkness, there is no respite, no moment when you are not exposed. This eternal daylight creates an atmosphere of relentless surveillance, as if the very sky is complicit in the giant's hunt, refusing to offer the comforting cloak of twilight. It transforms their domain from a simple location into a liminal space, a threshold where the normal laws of time and the cosmos are suspended, preparing the traveler for the ultimate violation of natural law, cannibalism. This symbolic interpretation elevates the Laestrygonians beyond simple flesh-eating ogres. They become an archetype of the world's consuming hostility. Their cannibalism is the ultimate expression of this principle. In the natural world, everything is consumed. The lion eats the gazelle, the worm consumes the leaf, the sea erodes the cliff. It is a cycle of life and death that is necessary, but from a human perspective, it is also terrifyingly impersonal and brutal. The Laestrygonians personify this cycle in its most raw and terrifying form. They are nature not as a nurturing mother, but as a devouring force that sees humanity not as fellow beings, but as just another link in the food chain, mere biomass to be processed and absorbed. When King Antiphates casually devours a man, it is not an act of rage or ritual. It is as natural to him as a hawk taking a mouse. This is why their horror is so potent and lasting. They represent a universe without morality, where the civilized concepts of hospitality, mercy, and shared humanity are not just absent, but are revealed to be fragile illusions that shatter upon contact with the raw, immoral reality of the natural world. They are the nightmare that every ancient sailor carried in his heart, the fear that the inviting shore was not a refuge but a mouth. At its core, the terror of the Laestrygonians isn't just about their size or their appetite, it's about what they represent. They are the ultimate other, a concept that defines a civilization by showcasing everything it is not. For the ancient Greeks, a people who built their identity around the polis, the city-state with its laws, its forums, and its shared culture, the Laestrygonians were a walking, breathing nightmare of everything that lay beyond those protective walls. They embodied a complete inversion of the Hellenic world, a society built on principles that were the direct opposite of everything a Greek citizen held dear. This wasn't merely a foreign kingdom with different customs. This was a culture that had taken the fundamental pillars of Greek civilization, law, hospitality, community, and reason, and shattered them, rebuilding their society from the fragments into something monstrous. The most profound and terrifying violation is their treatment of Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality. This was not a mere social nicety in the ancient world. It was a divine covenant, a contract between host and guest enforced by Zeus Xenios himself. To welcome a stranger, to offer them food, drink, and protection before even asking their name was a sacred duty. It was the glue that held the fragile network of travel and communication together in a dangerous world. The entire Laestrygonian episode is a systematic, grotesque perversion of this ritual. It begins with the daughter at the spring, performing the first act of Xenia by guiding the strangers. She leads them not to a welcoming feast, but to the heart of the slaughterhouse. The queen, instead of offering sustenance, summons the instrument of their destruction. And King Antiphates, the host, completes the betrayal by making his guest the main course. This isn't just a breach of etiquette, it's a spiritual attack. It signals that in this land, the gods of Olympus hold no sway. The rules that make the world predictable and safe have been repealed, replaced by a single, brutal law of consumption. This inversion transforms the familiar into the alien. The Greeks feared the chaotic and the lawless, and the Laestrygonians are the embodiment of a world without nomos or law. They have a king, a queen, a princess, and a city, suggesting a social structure, but it is a structure dedicated solely to predation. Their community is not a collective for mutual benefit and culture, but a hunting pack organized for maximum efficiency. This perversion of social order is perhaps more frightening than facing a solitary monster like the Cyclops. A single giant is an anomaly, a force of nature that can be outwitted. An entire society of giants represents a viable, functioning alternative to civilization, one where the moral universe is turned upside down. It suggests that the order the Greeks cherished was not a universal truth, but a fragile construct that could vanish the moment one sailed beyond the horizon, into a world where people were not people but prey. Their cannibalism is the ultimate symbol of this otherness. In the Greek mind, the act of eating cooked food, prepared through culture and technology, was a key distinction between humanity and beasts. To consume raw human flesh was to reject that distinction entirely, to place oneself outside the human community. The Laestrygonians don't just kill their enemies, they incorporate them. They erase the boundary between us and them in the most literal way possible, dissolving Greek identity into their own monstrous bodies. This act of consumption is the final proof of their absolute alienation. They are not just outsiders, they are anti-civilization, a society that thrives by devouring the very concept of civilized life. Understanding them as the other also helps explain their lasting power in the mythological imagination. Every culture defines itself against an external threat, a monstrous reflection that highlights its own virtues. For the Greeks, the Laestrygonians were that dark mirror. They were everything the ordered, philosophical, city-dwelling Greek feared. The savage, the irrational, the consuming wilderness that constantly threatened to encroach upon the cultivated olive groves and marble temples. They were the psychological embodiment of the dangers of exploration, a warning that the world was vast, strange, and filled with beings for whom the most sacred Greek values were not just meaningless but delicious. This question of the Laestrygonians' place in the divine order strikes at the very heart of their terrifying nature. If Zeus and the Olympian gods presided over a cosmos of justice and law, how could such a race of consumptive monsters be permitted to exist, seemingly thriving in their corner of the world? Their existence wasn't just a physical threat, it was a theological problem, a pocket of radical chaos that appeared to operate entirely outside the gods' jurisdiction. To understand this, we need to look at the Greek conception of the universe not as a place of uniform divine control, but as a recently conquered territory. The Olympians, led by Zeus, had won their supremacy in a brutal war against the older, primordial forces, the Titans and the Giants. This victory established a new order, a cosmos governed by laws like Xenia and fate, but it did not erase the old world completely. The Laestrygonians can be seen as a remnant, a holdover from that pre-Olympian age, a fragment of the untamed, earth-born chaos that the new regime had not yet fully subdued or had chosen to isolate. Their cannibalism and absolute violation of hospitality aren't just monstrous acts, they are a direct repudiation of Zeus's own authority as the enforcer of Xenia. By devouring his guests, King Antiphates wasn't merely being savage, he was committing an act of cosmic rebellion. So why didn't Zeus simply smite them with a thunderbolt? The answer lies in the complex and often hands-off nature of Greek divinity. The gods did not micromanage the world. They established the rules and expected them to be followed, intervening directly only in specific circumstances, often when their own personal honor or their favorite mortal children were at stake. The Laestrygonians, operating at the very fringe of the known world, existed in a kind of theological blind spot. They were not directly challenging Olympus, they were merely being what they were in their own domain. Their existence served a functional purpose in the divine ecosystem. The world of Greek myth needed dangers and boundaries. It needed places where heroes could be tested to their absolute limits and where the consequences of failure were apocalyptic. The Laestrygonians were one of these ultimate tests. For a hero like Odysseus, famed for his intelligence and guile, confronting a problem that could not be solved by cleverness was the point. The encounter at Telepylos wasn't a puzzle to be solved. It was a lesson in raw, survivalist instinct. It taught him and the audience that for all his metes, there were forces in the world so overwhelmingly hostile and irrational that the only divine gift that mattered was the speed of your ship and a healthy dose of luck. In this sense, the gods may have tolerated the Laestrygonians as a necessary component of a balanced cosmos, a stark reminder of the chaos that lay beyond the civilized sphere, a dark contrast that made the order of the Greek world seem all the more precious and hard-won. They were the ever-present there-be dragons on the map, a living warning that kept mortals from becoming too prideful and reminded them why they needed the gods' protection in the first place. This perspective transforms the Laestrygonians from a simple monster encounter into a crucial part of Odysseus's theological education. He arrives at their harbor still somewhat confident from his previous victory over the Cyclops, a monster he ultimately blinded and escaped through a brilliant verbal trick. But the Laestrygonians offer no such opportunity for cleverness. There is no dialogue, no chance to declare himself nomen. There is only immediate, overwhelming violence. This forces a profound shift in Odysseus's understanding of the world. He learns that divine favor is not a shield against all dangers, and that the cosmos contains pockets of such pure, immoral hostility that they exist almost outside the gods' concern. His escape is not a victory, it is a catastrophic survival that strips him of nearly all his companions. The message is clear: the gods provide the rules and the tools, but they do not guarantee safety. The existence of the Laestrygonians proves that the universe, even under Zeus's rule, still has sharp, hungry teeth, and that some corners of it are simply not meant for mortals to conquer. While every other ship was being pounded into driftwood, a singular reality would have crashed down upon Odysseus with the force of one of those falling boulders. His leadership, his famed intelligence, and the lives of every man left were all that stood between survival and sharing the gruesome fate of their comrades. In that maelstrom of splintering timber and dying screams, his mind had to work with a chilling, almost inhuman clarity. The very geography that had betrayed them now became the only possible key to their escape. His own ship was not moored within the sheltered, circular kill box of the main harbor. By a stroke of immense fortune, or perhaps his own inherent caution, he had kept his vessel just outside the narrow channel, lashed directly to the cliff face itself. This was not a comfortable mooring, it was an exposed and precarious position, but in this single moment it became their salvation. Imagine the scene from his perspective. He is tied to the very rock face from which the giants are launching their attack. He can feel the vibrations of their massive footsteps through the stone, hear their roars echoing just above him. His ship is a fragile nutshell clinging to a mountain that has come alive with murderous intent. The narrow entrance to the harbor, which moments before was a gateway to rest, is now a choke point clogged with the wreckage of his fleet and the flailing bodies of his men. To sail through it would be to sail directly through the heart of the massacre, an impossible gauntlet of falling rocks and waiting spears. His decision in that moment reveals the core of his heroic nature, a blend of tactical genius and ruthless pragmatism. He did not give the order to cut the lines and charge forward into certain death. Instead, he commanded his terrified crew to use their oars and poles to push away from the cliff, leveraging their ship off the very rock to which they were tethered. This was a desperate, back-breaking maneuver, a slow and agonizing process of inching their way along the cliffside, using the wall itself as a fulcrum to move parallel to the shore, staying tucked in its shadow, rather than launching out into the open channel where they would be instantly targeted. It was a crab-like scuttle for survival, a retreat that required every ounce of strength and nerve from his crew, who would have been simultaneously rowing, poling, and witnessing the utter destruction of their friends just a few hundred yards away. This escape is arguably one of the most defining moments in the entire Odyssey, not because it's a victory, but because it is a catastrophic survival that showcases a different kind of heroism. Here, Odysseus is not the triumphant warrior of the Trojan War, nor is he the clever trickster who would later blind the Cyclops. In this moment, he is pure survival instinct. His cunning, or metis, is not used to outwit an opponent with words, but to outmaneuver an overwhelming force through environmental awareness and decisive action. There was no time for a clever ruse or a long-term plan. The only strategy was to get out immediately, using whatever marginal advantage their position offered. This highlights a crucial aspect of his character that often gets overshadowed by his more famous deceptions: his profound understanding of raw, physical reality. He knew his ship, he knew the sea, and he could read a landscape with a sailor's eye, turning a precarious mooring into a lifeline. The psychological toll of this escape must have been shattering. He wasn't just fleeing from monsters, he was forced to abandon his entire fleet and the hundreds of men under his command. As he maneuvered his single ship to safety, he was leaving behind his community, his responsibility, his friends. The sound of their screams would have been the soundtrack to his getaway, a haunting that would follow him for the rest of his journey. This creates a profound and tragic complexity in his character. He is both the savior of his remaining crew and the captain who survived a disaster that consumed nearly everyone he led. This duality is central to the Odyssean experience. He is a hero constantly marked by loss, and his wisdom is hard-won through trauma. The Laestrygonian episode, more than any other, strips away the glory of the heroic age and reduces it to its most essential element, the will to live. It proves that for all his intelligence, Odysseus's most vital trait is his resilience, his ability to make the horrifying choice to retreat and endure in the face of an unstoppable force, a lesson in leadership that is as brutal as it is indispensable. Now let's journey to the sun-scorched, rugged island of Sardinia, where the landscape itself seems to whisper an ancient secret. Scattered across its rolling hills and dramatic coastal plateaus are the silent, haunting remnants of the Neuragic civilization, the Neuragi. These are not simple stone huts or village ruins. They are thousands of immense conical tower fortresses, built from colossal, unmortared blocks of basalt and limestone, rising from the earth like the stone fists of forgotten giants. To stand at the base of a complex Neurag, like the magnificent Su Neuraxi di Barumini, is to feel a profound sense of scale and antiquity. The largest of these structures could reach nearly 90 feet in height, with walls over 15 feet thick at the base, constructed with a technique so precise and powerful that later Greeks would call it Cyclopean, believing only a race of giants could have moved such immense rocks into place. Their design is both simple and sophisticated, a central, Tholos-style tower, often surrounded by a labyrinthine bastion of interconnecting walls and secondary towers, creating a formidable, multi-layered fortress. From their high battlements, the Neuragic people commanded sweeping views of the coastline and the fertile plains, a clear sign of a society that was organized, strategic, and perhaps frequently on the defensive. For any early Greek sailor, blown off course or exploring the central Mediterranean, the sight of these formidable stone towers looming on the horizon would have been utterly alien and deeply intimidating. They did not resemble the familiar temples or palaces of the Aegean world. These structures were primal, imposing, and spoke of a people deeply connected to the stone of their land, capable of architectural feats that would have seemed superhuman to an outsider. It requires very little imagination to see how, over generations of retelling, these formidable fortresses could have evolved in the Greek consciousness into the very palaces of the Laestrygonians. The Neuragi are not merely buildings, they are the physical echo of the giants' homes in the myth, a tangible, archaeological bridge between a terrifying story and a very real, formidable culture. But the connection goes far beyond just the appearance of the towers. The entire timeline and character of the Neuragic civilization align remarkably well with the kind of society that could inspire such a terrifying legend. This was not a fleeting culture. It thrived for centuries, from the Bronze Age well into the Iron Age, precisely during the era when early Mycenaean Greeks were beginning to explore and trade across the Mediterranean. The Neuragic people were skilled metallurgists, renowned for their bronze weaponry and the mysterious bronze figurines they left behind, often depicting warriors, chieftains, and scheming horned figures. They were a formidable, insular power, and their island was rich in the metals that the Greek world craved. An encounter between a lost Greek fleet and the warriors of this powerful, unfamiliar civilization would not have been a friendly meeting of traders. It could easily have been a violent, defensive confrontation. If the Neuragic people were, on average, more robust and taller than the Greeks, a distinct possibility given different diets and genetics, that physical distinction alone could have been exaggerated in the frantic tales of survivors into a full-blown race of cannibalistic giants. The strategic placement of the Neuragic along the coast, particularly in the north around what is now Castelsardo with its steep cliffs and sheltered inlets, creates a landscape that is a near-perfect match for Homer's description of Telepylos. A narrow channel leading to a protected harbor watched over by towering stone structures on the cliffs. The geography fits the myth like a key in a lock. The legend of the Laestrygonians, then, begins to feel less like a pure fantasy and more like a ghostly folk memory, a story born from the genuine trauma and cultural shock of an early, disastrous contact. The Neuragic were the homes of a powerful, perhaps defensive people, not literal giants, but to the terrified eyes of shipwrecked or attacked sailors fleeing for their lives, the distinction would have been meaningless. They returned to the Aegean world with a story of a land of unimaginable stone towers, inhabited by a race of immense, warlike cannibals. The reality of the Neuragic civilization provided the bedrock, and over centuries of oral tradition, the poetry of fear did the rest, transforming a formidable island culture into one of the most enduring nightmares of the ancient world. Even after navigating through their horrifying story and the many theories about their origins, the Laestrygonians leave us standing at the edge of a dark and silent sea, staring into the fog of unanswered questions. For all their terrifying impact, they remain strangely obscure in the grand tapestry of Greek mythology, especially when you consider how household names like the Cyclops or the Sirens have become. This very obscurity is their first and most profound mystery. Why did these architects of Odysseus's single greatest loss fade into the background, while other monsters captured the ancient imagination so completely? Perhaps it's because their horror was too absolute, too final. The Cyclops is a monster you can outwit. His cave is a puzzle box with a clever solution. The Sirens offer a temptation you can resist by being tied to a mast, but the Laestrygonians offer no such engagement. There is no riddle to solve, no weakness to exploit, no temptation to overcome. There is only the immediate, overwhelming reality of being prey. Their narrative function is pure, unadulterated destruction, a lesson in the limits of human cleverness when faced with an insatiable natural force. They are a narrative dead end, a horror so complete that it doesn't invite further storytelling, only a desperate, traumatized escape. This might explain why they never became popular figures in later art or drama. Their story is one of pure, unmitigated loss, lacking the heroic struggle or moral complexity that Greek audiences often crave. This obscurity extends deep into their own origins, leading us to one of the most tantalizing gaps in all of mythology: who or what created the Laestrygonians? For almost every other monster in the Greek canon, we have a detailed genealogy. We know the Cyclops Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon and the nymph Thoosa. We know the Minotaur is the offspring of a queen and a divinely sent bull. But for the Laestrygonians, there is a stunning silence. No surviving text gives us a clear parentage for King Antiphates or his people. They simply are. This absence is deafening. In a mythos obsessed with lineage and the interconnectedness of all things, from gods to heroes to monsters, the Laestrygonians exist as a stark anomaly. This lack of a creation myth could be the strongest evidence for the theory that they were adopted from a pre-Greek, indigenous folklore. They feel like an entire mythological package that was imported wholesale, their own native creation stories lost in the process of cultural assimilation. The Greeks who heard the tale from Sardinian or Sicilian traders might have received the monster without its backstory, seamlessly weaving the terrifying what into the Odyssey without ever learning the why or the from where. Alternatively, their missing genealogy might be a deliberate narrative choice. By giving them no divine parent, Homer and other poets may have been emphasizing their otherness. They are not part of the familiar, if dangerous, family of the gods. They are outsiders to the very core, belonging to an older, more primal world that the Olympian order had not yet fully categorized or subdued. They are chaos given form, and chaos by its very nature lacks a tidy birth certificate. This leads to another haunting question. Did the Laestrygonians have a spiritual life of their own? Did they look up at the same stars as the Greeks and worship a pantheon? Or did their cannibalistic nature define a religion of consumption where the act of devouring was itself a sacred rite? Imagine the possibilities. Perhaps they worshipped a monstrous earth mother, a goddess of the cliffs and the hungry sea, to whom they offered their human prey in a grisly communion. Maybe their king was also their high priest, and the feast following a successful ambush was a somber, ritualistic event, thanking their god for the bounty provided. There are echoes of this in other cannibalistic myths, where the consumption of an enemy is believed to transfer their strength or appease a deity's endless hunger. On the other hand, their society might have been utterly irreligious, their existence so purely physical and predatory that the concept of divinity was meaningless to them. Their god was their own appetite, their temple the slaughterhouse harbor, their prayer the roar that echoed from the cliffs. This void in our knowledge is a playground for the imagination, but it also underscores how they function in the myth. They are not presented as a people with an internal life we can understand. They are a force of nature, and we do not ask what a hurricane worships or what moral code a landslide follows. Perhaps the most practical, yet equally unresolved, mystery is the simplest one. What happened to them after Odysseus fled? The epic moves on, following our traumatized hero to the island of Circe and beyond, but the fate of the Laestrygonians is left entirely untold. Did they continue their watch, their harbor eventually becoming a legend so feared that no sailor dared approach for centuries, leaving them to wither in isolation? Or were they, like so many monstrous challenges in mythology, ultimately destroyed by a later hero? Did a figure like Hercules, during one of his labors, hear of the man-eating giants and descend upon their city, cleansing the harbor in a battle even more titanic than the one Odysseus witnessed? The lost epic, the Telegony, might have held an answer, a return to that cursed shore for a final reckoning, but its secrets are lost to us. The silence is itself significant. In the end, the Laestrygonians are defined not by their history or their destiny, but by a single catastrophic moment. They are eternalized in the act of destruction, a permanent scar on Odysseus's journey, and a chilling reminder that some horrors in the world are not meant to be understood, conquered, or even remembered in detail. They are meant to be survived, and their ultimate fate is irrelevant next to the terrifying truth they represent. That beyond the edge of the map, there are places where the world is still hungry and you are on the menu. And so we reach the end of our harrowing voyage into the dark origins of the Laestrygonians, from the foundational terror they unleashed in the Odyssey to their profound symbolic weight as pure embodiments of primal fear. We have navigated the deceptive calm of their harbor, witnessed the catastrophic efficiency of their ambush, and traced the echoes of their story from the stark cliffs of Sardinia to the philosophical depths of James Joyce's Dublin. This journey reveals that their power is not merely in their size or their cannibalism, but in what they represent, the absolute other, a complete inversion of civilization where hospitality becomes a trap and humanity is reduced to mere sustenance. They are the nightmare of a hostile and intelligent nature, a force that cannot be outwitted, only escaped, leaving behind only trauma and loss. This is why they continue to captivate and horrify us, even when compared to more famous monsters. While the Cyclops is a solitary brute and Medusa a cursed figure, the Laestrygonians present a systemic horror, an entire society built around consumption, a chilling reminder that the greatest dangers may not be lone anomalies, but entire cultures operating by rules we cannot comprehend. Their legacy endures because the fears they tap into are universal and timeless. The fear of the unknown landscape, the violation of sacred trust, and the ultimate dread of being consumed, of being erased not just from life but from memory itself. They are the permanent residents of the psychological frontier, the here-be dragons warning on the map of the human soul. Now we turn this chilling discussion over to you. The ancient world is filled with a pantheon of terrifying beings, each embodying a different facet of our deepest anxieties. Was it the one-eyed Cyclops in his lonely cave, the enchanting but deadly song of the sirens, or the shape-shifting cunning of a goddess like Circe that you find most frightening? Share which ancient monster haunts your imagination the most in the comments below. We are truly fascinated to hear which legends keep you up at night. Thank you for joining us on this descent into one of mythology's darkest corners. If you found this exploration gripping, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the myths and monsters that have shaped our stories for millennia. Until next time, may your harbors always be safe.